Welcome to the River City Church podcast. Our prayer is that this message would inspire and encourage you, build your faith, and point you to the life-changing love of Jesus. May you enjoy the goodness of God as you follow him today.
Good morning, River City. How are we doing this morning? Really? Wow. My name is Jason Casey, a member of the teaching team here at River City. Really pumped to be with you. My family and I have been here for about 6 years. My wife and I just celebrated 28 years. Did I get that right? 28 years of marriage. We also serve on the marriage ministry team. By the way, today afterwards, the blue tent outside, if you're here, you're married in a healthy marriage and looking for someone to serve, we'd love to talk to you. This morning, I'm excited to be with you to wrap up our series on stories of the kingdom and looking at the parables of Jesus and what they tell us about him and about the kingdom that's coming. Before we get into the text this morning, two things. One, I didn't bring a sheep. I know Johnny said I might have a sheep up here. I've tried that in the past. I had a rooster one time for a Good Friday sermon. It was a terrible, terrible experience. I ended up having to get removed from the stage. So anyway, no sheep today. Second thing is our confession. Our confession is something we do as a church almost every Sunday. And it's something that roots us, it brings us back to center, it brings us back to our foundation. It's a statement of truth in two parts. Again, Johnny last week did a great job reminding us that both parts are necessary. Keeping those things in tension is necessary. Our brokenness and our belovedness. And if we emphasize our brokenness, it either leads to a posture of groveling in fear before this almighty God that's just ready to pounce, or it leads to this performance mentality where I have to continue to do and achieve and try to earn something that he's freely giving me. If I overemphasize my belovedness, it leads to entitlement, contentment, and we miss out on the whole point of knowing his love, which is to be transformed into the image of his Son. So this morning, as we start, we say our confession together. We are badly broken. Yes, we are. I'm going to jump right into our text this morning, and I'm going to read the parable of the sheep and the goats from Matthew 25, and I'm going to read it out of the Message version. It's not the version that I study out of, but it's the version that when I want to go and I want to reflect and I want to hear it in from a different perspective, it's where I go. And so I'd like to read it to you again in the spirit of the parables. Hopefully, maybe you'll hear a story that you've heard over and over again for the first time. And as I do, would you be looking for and asking the question, what does this story tell me about the king? And what does it tell me about the kingdom? It goes like this. When he finally arrives, blazing in beauty and all his angels with him, the Son of Man will take his place on his glorious throne. Then all the nations will be arranged before him, and he will sort the people out, much as a shepherd sorts out sheep and goats, putting sheep to his right, goats to his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what's coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation. And here's why. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was homeless, and you gave me a room. I was shivering, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then those sheep are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And then the king will say, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me." Then he will turn to the goats, the ones on his left, and say, "Get out, worthless goats. You're good for nothing but the fires of hell." And why? You want to know why? Because I was hungry and you gave me no meal. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was homeless and you gave me no bed. I was shivering and you gave me no clothes. Sick and in prison and you never visited. Then those goats are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or homeless or shivering or sick or in prison and didn't help?" And he will answer them, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you fail to do one of these things to someone who is being overlooked or ignored, that was me. You failed to do it to me. Then those goats will be herded to their eternal doom, but the sheep to their eternal reward. Earlier this summer, we were at our oldest daughter's graduation up in Missouri, and the commencement speaker shared what he called the transformation formula. And the transformation formula goes something like this: 10% content, 30% practice, 60% reflection. 10% content, 30% practice, and 60% reflection. And I didn't like it. I don't like it. It does a number on me. And all summer long, I've just been thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it, kind of proving his point. 60% reflection. For decades of my life, I've got that wrong and emphasized content and practice. And I think for the most part, the church, the last couple of generations, has erred on the side of content and practice to the exclusion of reflection. In the coaching that I do in San Antonio, we tell our clients all the time, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So as I knew this sermon was coming up, I've been spending time reflecting, reading over and over and over again, and asking the question, what does this story have to do? What does it tell me about the king? What does it tell me about the kingdom? And what do I do with it, right? So as I've been reflecting, I've realized that I think I've had a faulty understanding of the story all along. See, the temptation is you hear the story, and again, if you've been in the church, you've heard the story over and over and over again, stories like it too. The temptation is we hear that story and we go, oh, I got to go out and do something. I got to go out and feed the hungry. I got to go out and visit the sick. I got to go out and do the thing. And hear me out. You could do far worse than apply the passage that way, right? But I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. I really don't. So as I've been reflecting, the thing that's kind of come up for me in my story, my journey, is that I've had this constant companion in my journey of faith, and that's with fear. And so if I can, I'd like to just give you a little peek into my journey and show you how fear has tainted the way I see God and see me and see others. It begins when I was 11. My parents, I think we shared this before, were missionaries in Chile. We grew up in Santiago. They were planning a church, and one night we were in this little concrete church building sitting on these wooden benches, and this woman gets up to share her testimony, her story of faith. And an 11-year-old boy listening to this story of her in a moment of desperation, literally giving her life to the devil. And the stories that came after that, she shared what happened in her life because of it. And she went on to talk about being delivered and all that. And I don't know what to do with all of that. All I know is that as an 11-year-old boy in that room that night, I was terrified. Terrified with this Harry Potter kind of fear that if I said the word Voldemort, he would appear, right? Laying in bed that night, just shaking. What if I say the wrong combination of things? What if I think the wrong thing? What's going to happen? And this great fear overcame me, and I called out. My dad came in, and he sat on the bed. He stroked my hair, and he prayed over me and fell asleep. But that led to a series of nights, and ultimately I ended up giving my life to Christ. I couldn't live like that. And when I was baptized, all of that, those appearances at night, that fear at night went away, but fear stayed with me. Fast forward, I'm getting older. The way fear showed up in my faith, in my new teenage faith, was this symbol or this image of scales in the background, always in the background, always had to prove and do to make up for the things I was failing in. Always trying to do things to earn, always trying to do things to avert God's punishment and anger and his wrath. And so going to Bible college and then a ministry leader, just constantly putting on a mask. I can't let you see what's going on out of fear, right? Fear, constant companion. Fast forward again, we're in Italy, we're leading a team of church planters there. And it was in a season where I was preaching to our little church in Italy every week and doing a lot of writing and studying and doing a lot of mental ministry, but not a lot of hands-on ministry. And I felt convicted, like I need to be doing something. And so I found this Mensa del Povero, which is the Italian equivalent of a soup kitchen. And y'all, it was 3-course Italian. Like it was really good. If you're struggling, need a meal, that was the place to go. I found it. I went in, upstairs, and I met these 3 nuns that were preparing the meal. And I went up to Suor Pia, this older. I mean, she's like just fit the bill. She was this anyway. Suor Pia, and I said, Suor Pia, my name's Jason. I'm a missionary. Is there any way I can help? And she said, she kind of gave me this smirk, and she looked me up and down. She's like, I'll give you a shot, right? So she sent me downstairs, and she had me learn the check-in process. And I began doing that once a week for a couple of years. I absolutely hated it. I hated almost everything about it. And I'll tell you why in just a little bit. Let's get back to our parable. We've been defining in this series what parables are. And I'm going to go back to Jennifer's, the very first Sunday that we started the series. I like the way she put it. Parable is a story using common images, everyday scenes and characters with the intent to disrupt our thinking, to invite us to reconsider reality. Jesus used them all the time. He loved them. They were easy to take away. We didn't have phones and internet back there. They couldn't take notes even. And so they were really, I think it was a really creative way to tell a story that stayed with people. And I think he knew this transformation formula. I really do. I think he knew that by telling the story and not explaining it, it's like a magician who doesn't tell you how it's done. You go away and you talk about it and hey, what did he mean by that? Like what was in that, right? And so he loved parables. He loved using that form of story. So we're in the Gospel of Matthew. If you're new to the Bible, that's the first book in the New Testament, written by one of Jesus' followers, 28 chapters. We're at the end of chapter 25, immediately after. This is a series of stories that Jesus is answering. The disciples are wanting to know, what is it going to be like in the end? Immediately following, we read in chapter 26 that the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, were enraged by Jesus' teaching, and this was the final straw. They were going to try to find a way to have him killed. And then we go into the upper room, the Last Supper, his betrayal and crucifixion. So we're right at the end of his life. This is his last public teaching, his last story, and I believe Matthew placed it here on purpose. There's a build-up to the story. A couple other things, the geography. I want you to think a minute about the geography of the moment. If Jesus was on the Mount of Olives, which it says that he was, talking to his disciples, if he was facing Jerusalem, Mount of Olives is to the east of Jerusalem. If he's facing Jerusalem, this story that was so many prophecies told about what would happen in Jerusalem. It is the seat of David's kingdom. It was where the temple was for years, where God's presence abided. It's an important city. If Jesus is facing Jerusalem, off to his left is the Valley of Hinnom, which is translated the Valley of Gehenna, which is where we get not only the word, but the description of hell. It's the valley where generations before Israelites had sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire to foreign gods. It was considered like the trash valley where people would throw their refuse and corpses. It was this constantly smoldering valley off to Jesus' left. Directly before him, up to the right, is the Kidron Valley. They would have crossed the Kidron Valley coming up to the mount from the city. And up and to the north. And this Kidron Valley also went by the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Anybody name their kid Jehoshaphat? Also known as the Valley of Judgment or Decision Valley. Jesus knew the scriptures. He actually inspired the scriptures. He was the Word. He knew the scriptures. And there's a passage in Joel chapter 3 where the Lord speaks through Joel and he says, "Gather the nations in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Gather the nations in Decision Valley because I am going to judge them for the way they have treated my people." Echoes, right? Now, we don't know that day if there was a shepherd and a sheep conveniently off to the left. But what we do know is that sheep and shepherds and goats, that would have been a very common occurrence. They would have seen it almost every day. And they would have seen the sheep and the goats go out into the field and graze, and then in the evening come home, and they would know the practice that the shepherd separates the sheep and the goats. They have different needs. right? They're different creatures. And so they would be very familiar. It would be like if I said to you, I'm going to make a Buc-ee's run. You know I'm getting gas and I'm probably getting a snack, maybe using the restroom, right? Like you know what I mean when I say I'm making a Buc-ee's run. Same thing with sheep and goats and shepherds. And there's one more thing. I believe it's hard not to see the connection with Ezekiel 34, another Old Testament prophecy. I want to read a little excerpt from Ezekiel 34 and see if you don't see some parallels between the parable of the sheep and the goats and what God is saying through the prophet Ezekiel. God's message came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherd leaders of Israel. Yes, prophesy. Tell those shepherds, God the Master says, doom to you, shepherds of Israel, feeding your own mouths. Aren't shepherds supposed to feed sheep? You drink the milk, you make clothes from the wool, you roast the lambs, but you don't feed the sheep. You don't build up the weak ones. You don't heal the sick. You don't doctor the injured. You don't go after the strays. You don't look for the lost. You bully and badger them, and now they're scattered every which way because there was no shepherd. Scattered in easy pickings for wolves and coyotes. Scattered, my sheep, exposed and vulnerable across mountains and hills. My sheep scattered all over the world, and no one out looking for them. And the people of Jesus' day would have seen the connections. They would have seen the connections. And I have to wonder, right, if the people that day listening wouldn't have conjured up, they would constantly have these images of armies coming in to rescue Israel from their oppressors. And they also would have had clear categories, thinking about those prophecies, about who's in and who's out, and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and who's going to get rewarded and who's going to get punished. And as he so often does, Jesus flips the script. Parables always have some element, some surprise, and again, Jesus flips the script. So what I'd like to do is read the story again, and I'm going to pause, and I just want to point out things as we go through. But again, I just want you to ask, what is this story telling me about the king, and what is it telling me about the kingdom? When he finally arrives, blazing in beauty, and all his angels with him, the Son of Man will take his place on his glorious throne. I can't wait. Then all the nations will be arranged before him, and he will sort the people out, much as a shepherd sorts out sheep and goats, putting sheep to his right and goats to his left. Son of Man was a reference back to Daniel. It was Jesus' favorite way of referring to himself. The reference to glory and angels and thrones all seem to indicate a future culmination of all things kind of moment that was coming. Here we read global king, global kingdom. The word nations is in there, and that's a Greek word, ethne, which really refers to people groups. And I believe that's kind of preparing us for Matthew 28. The last thing Jesus tells his followers, go into ta ethne, go into all nations and make disciples, right? This is a global king and a global kingdom. Again, whenever you have a parable with multiple parties, you have good and bad categories, and the categories Jesus chose weren't the standard ones. He wasn't choosing educated and learned, wealthy or poor, master or slave. And the people, just like you, would have been asking, who's going to be the good guy in the story? Who's going to be the bad guy? And where do I fit in? Am I a sheep or am I a goat? Then the king will say to those on his right, enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what's coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation. And here's why. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was homeless. You gave me a room. I was shivering and you gave me clothes. I was sick and you stopped to visit. I was in prison and you came to me. And you can't read those 6 statements and not go back to other teachings of Jesus. If you know anything about Matthew, especially Sermon on the Mount, especially the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. This is a topsy-turvy kingdom and a king that they were not expecting. Here we get the explanation too. This is why you're blessed. This is why you are co-heirs of the kingdom, because you see and you love 6 descriptors to basic needs: food, drink, shelter, clothing, wellness, freedom. And I wonder if Jesus isn't making eye contact with his disciples and thinking through stories, encounters, things that they've been through, things that they've had to go without, moments in which other people would have shown them that kind of love and care and invited them in and been with them in their sickness. Then those sheep are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you?" Then the king will say, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me." This is the twist. This is the undercover boss moment. It's a testing or revealing of the heart. The big surprise is they didn't know. The sheep were surprised. Wait, we made it in? We're co-heirs? Like, they were honestly surprised. The service rendered was not done for a reward. They were surprised and honored. The Greek here for overlooked and ignored is clear. It's translated least of these. And it refers to the most insignificant in society, the most overlooked, the most invisible. The thing that stands out to me, I think, the most, though, is that Jesus identifies with those 6 conditions. He identifies with the hurting. And I think so often we think, to encounter God, I have to have my quiet time, or I have to be in the mountains or in the beach. And by all means, we can encounter God wherever we go. We can encounter Jesus wherever we go. I mean, he is within us, right? But if we really want to encounter him, if we really want to meet him, we got to be among the broken. We got to be among the hurting. Jesus identifies with these 6 conditions. In Acts chapter 9, Saul is persecuting the church. He's traveling from town to town and arresting Christians. And he's on the road to Damascus, and Jesus encounters him, and he falls off his donkey in this bright light and this voice from heaven, and Jesus says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He doesn't say, "Why are you persecuting my people?" He doesn't say, "Why are you persecuting the church?" He says, "Why are you persecuting me?" He associates, identifies with the hurting. And again, this is a throwback to the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, "Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." The people of the kingdom, they serve with no regard to what it looks like, what they benefit. They do it just because they see people and they see a need. Then he will turn to the goats, the ones on his left, and say, "Get out, worthless goats. You're good for nothing but the fires of hell." And why? "Because I was hungry and you gave me no meal. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was homeless and you gave me no bed. I was shivering and you gave me no clothes. Sick and in prison and you never visited." The imagery of fire, again, was probably a reference to Gehenna, off to the left, smoking in the distance, right? And again, 6 references. Here's something I want to point out. Jesus only expected them to do what they could. Notice he didn't say, "I want you to go and solve world hunger." He didn't say, "I want you to go and start a prison ministry." Those are all great things, but that's not what they're called out for. They're called out for just not seeing people. The people around them, the very ones they were encountering. He said, "I was there and you didn't do anything. You didn't give me anything to eat or drink." I mean, that's something simple that all of us, no matter our condition, we can do, right? So the call here is not this grandiose thing. I think it's about seeing people. These were sins of omission, failure to do what is right, like in the parable of the 10 virgins last week, right? It's a sin of omission rather than a sin of commission. It's something we didn't do that we should have done, rather than breaking some rule. I grew up in a musical home. My parents were products of the 60s, so there was a lot of John Denver and Simon and Garfunkel. They loved Keith Green, Christian artist, who wrote a song and put this parable to music. And I remember listening to it, again, part of that fear thread in my story, listening to it and being so convicted, I've got to go do. But here, it's about, as you're going, how are you responding to the people that you see? Then those goats are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or homeless or shivering or sick or in prison, it didn't help. The goats, just like the sheep, are surprised, but where the sheep are surprised and honored, the goats are surprised and exposed. Again, a reference to Matthew 7. They call him Lord. They know who he is in the story. He says, I didn't know you. You didn't see me. I didn't know you. It's that same kind of thoughts away from me. You get what is coming to you. You didn't see me. He will answer them, I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you fail to do one of these things to someone who is being overlooked or ignored, that was me. You failed to do it to me. So he repeats the twist. And then finally, it says, then those goats will be herded to their eternal doom, but the sheep to their eternal reward. And the word for reward there is the Greek word zoe. We find it in the Sermon on the Mount to describe how few find the path to life, full, overflowing, abundant life. In John 10:10, it came that they would have life. Zoe, it's that same word. Not something necessarily that's coming, but something that we have access to now. I believe the core of what Jesus was telling his disciples that day, what he's telling us today, has to do with who he is and how we see people. I hated almost everything about serving at the Mensa del Povero. It would always come in the middle of the week, and I would go, it's this building downtown in the city we lived in, and it was my job. I had like 50 or 60 vouchers that I had to hand out to two groups of people who'd go upstairs and eat this delicious meal. And I just hated it. It was 50 or 60 badly broken people, some drunk, some high. The smell, it smelled like sour clothing, dried vomit. People who were angry and desperate, not following the rules. And it grated on me. I hated it. I didn't like it. But the thing I hated most about the experience, week after week after week, was what it revealed about my heart. I didn't love these people. I didn't really even care. I could make myself care, but the reason I was there week after week was not because I had empathy, not because I had sympathy, not because I was trying to meet them and see them where they were. I was only doing it because I felt convicted to do it. I knew it was the right thing, and I thought it might make God happy and balance the scales. And here, I was sent, our team was sent to plant a church among Italian non-believers, and I was being ministered to by these three nuns who week after week after week would welcome these broken people into their place, into their space. They would take these people's faces in their hands, make eye contact, call them by name, full-bodied embraces. Have a seat at the table. What's mine is yours. I didn't have that. Oh, I was doing all the things. I left my family. I moved overseas, ministering all day long. Just didn't care about people. That experience sent me on a journey to really understand who are you, God, and what is grace. In the process, I realized I'd never really understood it. I didn't know what it was, never really experienced it. A friend of mine recently defined grace like this, and I like it. It's simple. It's probably oversimplified. But he said, if justice is getting what I deserve, mercy is not getting what I deserve. And grace is getting what I don't deserve. And I really love that. And in that season, I began to understand for the first time, and see it in Scripture, but experience it for myself, the grace of the Father. And in that time, I was reading a book, and I want to share two images, two metaphors, two mini parables out of that book, if I can, because I think it's so important in how we understand what Jesus is saying. The first is this. For a long time, I had this image of my brokenness as this massive heap, y'all. I mean, it's gross. And here you have my sexual sin. Here you have my lust and my pride. Here you have my anger when I'm driving. Ask my wife, she'll verify. Here you have all these things. And it's not just sins of commission, it's sins of omission. It's attitudes, it's beliefs, it's feelings of entitlement. It's gross, and it's this big pile that stands before me. And in the story, Jesus is on the other side of that pile with his arms crossed, eyes averted, rolling his eyes, foot tapping. He's going, freaking Jason, why won't you just get your act together? If you would just do the work, I could come around and be with you. What Grace says is that Jesus is next to me, arm around my shoulders, eyes locked in, smile on his face, and he's saying, oh, Jason, do you know how much I love you? Do you know that there's no ends to what I would do to have you with me? Do you know that there's nothing you could do to make me love you more than I already do? But here's the kicker for me when I read this story. Jesus doesn't just snap his fingers and make the sin go away. Wait, what? He paid the price I owed because of it. He set me free from the obligation to do anything to make up for it. And he turns with me to that pile and says, now, Jason, are you ready to get to work? Because I, in that mess, have so much treasure that I want to draw out. There's so much in there that I want to pull out and clean off and restore and redeem. There are so many relationships in here that are broken that I want to restore, that I want to make better than they were before. There is so much. This is literally fertilizer for the work I want to do in you and with you. That, friends, completely changed my perspective. For 30 whatever years until that moment, I may have understood a tiny little glimpse. But the idea that he comes on this side and wants to work with it finally allowed me to take off the mask and say, I got issues. I'm badly broken. The second image is this. If you take a DNA sample from a caterpillar and set it next to a DNA sample of a butterfly, do you know that there is no difference? Well, duh, Jason. It's the same animal, right? No difference in the DNA of a caterpillar and a butterfly. And no manner of yelling at the caterpillar, no manner of how many TED Talks you send the caterpillar or how many motivational speeches you expose the caterpillar to, you cannot make the caterpillar become the butterfly. It has to go through this death-like process where it has to wrap itself in its own waste and emerge what it was always made to be. The same, friends, is true of you and me. A change is needed. Grace changes everything. The story all along is that we were created to steward creation, that we are God-breathed, made in his image, icons, relics, that we reflect his image, and that broken and separated, the Lord would send the God-man, the Son of Man, to rescue us, to usher in his kingdom, to make all things right. And there were hints all along in the Old Testament about what he would be like, but no matter how many there were, the people were still expecting a Messiah that would be like David of old, with armies marching in. And you see it for 3 years, Jesus is with his disciples, and they have their hands on their hilts, ready to go to battle at any moment, and they're constantly asking, is now the time? Is now the time? And no matter how much he taught, no matter how much he modeled, no matter how much he healed, no matter how much he tried to get them to understand that he was not what they were expecting, hands on hilts. You see it at the very end, at the betrayal, Peter pulls out his sword and whacks. trying to force Jesus' hand. Judas, underhanded deals under the table, trying to force Jesus' hand. They just did not get it. And neither have we. Not always, not fully. I mean, how do we miss the fact that at the beginning of Matthew, he chose to reveal the detail about Jesus' name, Emmanuel, God with us. And at the very end in Matthew 28, he says, and surely as you go into ta ethne, I will be with you. How do we miss that? The goats in the story were those who held on to old categories, hold on to power and resources, who viewed people as tools or assets, and who abused their stewardship. And as generous as they may be, they simply did not see the king, and they did not see the overlooked or the ignored. The sheep in the story were those who truly saw the overlooked and responded in love. They were those who had new hearts with a law written on them, hearts of flesh, new eyes. They were those whom he would describe in the upper room in John as those who learned to abide in him, to receive a life-sustaining resources from him, be transformed by him. They would become little outposts of Eden in the world. The great surprise of the story to me is that the overlooked get seen because they have seen the overlooked. And we only see the overlooked and ignored if we receive new eyes to see. So, if we're reading this parable today from a posture of fear, we're missing it. And if we're reading it from a posture of entitlement, we're missing it. It's only as we walk with Jesus that we get eyes to see as he does, and in the process we see him in everyone we encounter. So I want to close with this story. David Crouch is a writer and a Christian leader and speaker. And he tells a story once he was at the Chicago O'Hare Airport. And he had a long layover. It was a cold winter night. And he decided to walk the full length of the airport. And if you've ever been there, it's large. Okay? This took a couple of hours. And as he walked the airport, he said, I'm going to try to look at everyone I pass, and I'm going to say to myself, image bearer, image bearer, image bearer. And he did this for a couple of hours, and he said he saw people from every walk of life, every age group, every nation around the world you could think of represented in that airport. And as he encountered every person, he said, image bearer, image bearer, image bearer, image bearer. By the time he was done, he got back to his gate. He was just a mess. It was a mess. And he got a glimpse of what I think we're supposed to take from the parable today. That if we are able to see people the way God does, we see Jesus in them. We see his design in them. And the call of his people is to see and to respond. It's quite simple. But it begins with that posture, understanding grace and knowing he is there. He identifies with them. Image bearer, image bearer, image bearer. Let's pray. Father, we can't do this without you. We don't want to do it without you. And so often we have. So Father, I ask today and this week as we go out into our busy lives, that you would help us to see you and the people around us. Give us new eyes to see. Would you deepen our faith? Would you deepen our understanding of your great love for us and your grace? Jesus, thank you for being a good king. Thank you for giving us a way to be part of your kingdom. Would you find us faithful, Jesus? Give us eyes to see the needs around us. Would you build our faith as we respond in love for those who are hurting around us? And Father, may New Braunfels be different. May it be more loved and seen this week as your people go out and see them. Jesus, we ask all of this in your name and for your glory. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. River City Church is all about experiencing and expressing God's love in our lives and community, and we hope that you've been able to experience that today. As grateful as I am that you've spent this time listening in this morning, this podcast is no substitute for full participation in a local church. I love it when River City people listen to other pastors, but it is those who show up week after week, faithfully giving their support and time and resources that make all of this possible. If we can help you get connected to a local church, pray for you, or support you in any way, click the link in the description and let us know. If you'd like to financially support the ministry of River City, click the Give link on our website in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to share this with your friends. Thanks so much for listening. May the Lord bless and keep you in all grace and peace.